In this video, we are going to write a program. It's the directions say write a program that calculates a car's gas mileage. The program should create a variable to store the number of gallons of gas the car can hold, and another variable to store the number of miles it can be driven on a full tank. It should then display the number of miles that may be driven per gallon of gas. Okay. All right. So the first thing that we will start off with is the class header. So it's going to start off public class. That's the class header on line 6 here, and then the curly braces will hold the class body. So again, make sure you indent off of the class body. We're going to put the main method in there, which is public static void main string args. All right, at that point you should be able to compile it. Just make sure everything's okay. All right, everything looks good. When you try to run it, nothing will really happen because there's not really any statements in here. Okay, so right off the bat, it says the program should create a variable to store the number of gallons of gas the car can hold. All right, so that probably will be a decimal number. So we'll declare this variable as type double, and then we need to think of a name for that. So we'll just call it tank size. And let's just say 20 for the time being as a double. Okay. So, all right, it says that another variable should store the number of miles it can be driven on a full tank of gas. Okay, so create another variable called total miles. So again, it probably should be of type double. Since it's a decimal number, and again, make sure that you use lowercase. Start your variables with lowercase names. Only classes, right, should start with uppercase names. All right, and then we're gonna just put some value in here. Let's say, I don't know, 372 miles as a double with the 0.0 on there. Okay. So a lot of these programs that we write at the very beginning of the class will kind of take the form of input. You'll have some input. In this case, the input is just us typing in the values for the variables. You can just make some numbers up and we can test some values in there. All right, and so this is the input phase, and then next up will come a process phase. And that process phase will make some calculations. In this case, right, what we need to do is to calculate the miles per gallon. Okay, so number of miles that may be driven per gallon of gas. So we're going to have to compute the miles per gallon. I'm just going to call that variable MPG. Okay. All right, and then it would be miles per gallon, right? So that's miles divided by the tank size, the number of gallons. All right, and you can compile that and make sure everything's okay. One thing I do notice is that people, when they first start off, they try to dump everything into the program at once and then compile. That's not really the most efficient way to do that. You're probably better off just adding a few lines of code and then compiling that, making sure that there aren't any errors in there. Okay, and then once that works, then moving forward, adding a few more lines and testing it out like that. Okay. All right, so going back to how these first few programs are structured, there's going to be an input phase, right, where we get the input. In the next chapter, we will talk about how to get input from the user, which is normally what the programs that you write do. And then after the input phase comes the process phase. You're going to take that information that you got from the user and then do something else with it. And then what you're going to do is the last phase is the output phase. So there you are going to print out the value of the variable. All right, so we have input, process, output. And a lot of our programs at the very beginning of the class will have that same pattern. They'll follow that same pattern, okay? All right, and so when I write that, I get 18.6, which seems reasonable, like a reasonable value there, as far as it looks like our calculation is correct. So a couple of things here to be careful of. Sometimes I'll see people who are beginning, right? They will do things like this, do 372.0, right? And then divide by the tank size. You don't want to use these literal numbers here. If you have them stored in variables, right, then what you should do is use the variable names, right, instead of using these literal numbers here. The reason for that is if you use literal numbers in your program, then what will happen is if you want to change these numbers, right? You want to reuse this program to make a different calculation. I want to change this to, 402 instead of 372. Then all I have to do is change the value of this variable. I don't have to go through and change any other lines, okay? So when you are writing these programs, one of the things to keep in mind is that you want to make these programs so that they are as reusable as possible. You don't want to have to be changing, a lot of different lines when the data, the input changes, okay? All right. So that's why I'm using the values of these variables here. So it's a lot easier to reuse this. Now, the next thing is the output. Okay, we're getting an output, and that's what it says. It says it should display the number of miles driven per gallon of gas, but really, you don't really want the message to be just a number that's spit out to the screen, right? Most of the time, you are writing these programs for other people to use, right? And so you want a decent message here. So so what you can do is add a little message to make this a little bit more user-friendly. All right, so something of this nature. The car's gas mileage is, right, and then the miles per gallon. All right, and so that's a little bit better, right? Message that the program displays. Now somebody, who's using this, they run it, they just see 20.1, they might have no idea exactly what that means. I mean, we know because we wrote the program, right? But the average user might not know. Another thing in here is you probably would want to make this message have the units in there. MPG for miles per gallon. All right, and so this message is much nicer than spitting out just a number with no context whatsoever given to the user. Okay, so make your output messages have a little context. It doesn't have to be War and Peace, but just something that's a little bit nicer than just spitting the number out there. The approach that we took was to add these using the concatenation operator for strings, right? So we have strings concatenated with a variable name, and you can see it just inserted the value of the variable into that sentence there. So we will use this only briefly. It's still good to know. In chapter 3, then we'll talk about using formatted output So in the chapter 2 practice problems, when you're writing those, don't worry about the format of the output. You'll notice a lot of times it will display the answer, a numerical answer to, you know, to a lot of decimal places. Just don't worry about that too much, and because in chapter 3 we'll directly address how to control all of that with a formatted print. Okay, so that's it for this one.